Okay, and we're at the podcast. Look at this book I got in the mail last week. It's big. It's big, isn't it? And also, look at this shirt I got. I haven't worn it in a couple of years, but this is the shirt I've been thinking about Eusebius with. This obviously from the Truman Show. I can't remember who got me this, but... So, okay, a lot to say in this episode, and I guess I don't have it totally planned out, so just kind of bear with me, but let's start here. You guys know who Abraham Lincoln is? But do you? I mean, this is a question I've been fascinated by for a long time. I mean, how people will kind of claim to know something about history, right? They'll go I know who Lincoln was. And it's interesting. I mean, it's interesting to think about what you have to know in order to know a person. How much would how much, not how much, but how much and what would a future person have to know about you in order for you now to feel yes, they have in fact gained a true concept of me. You understand? In other words, that they have the essence of me and not just some convenient projection that goes by my name. For example, for me, I know that Lincoln was the 14th or 16th president. I've heard he was honest. I know that he was gaunt and prone to melancholy. I know he died at Ford Theater, assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. I read a transcript of his fourth debate with Stephen Douglas, the one in Charleston, Illinois, and I skimmed some other debates, and those were in 1858, and he sounded pretty dang racist in those. And so I know he somehow evolved, probably in order to try to save the Union by, 1863 or so. And then I know that libertarians don't love him because he started this war with the South. Oh, and as I've said before, Walt Whitman used to walk past him frequently and exchange doffed caps. So I guess he liked walking. I've read the Gettysburg Address, and I know that Lincoln was a lawyer and sort of wishy-washy about sectarian religion. Whatever. Let's say that's all I know about Lincoln, okay? Do I know him really? Do I know that guy? You know what I mean? I don't know. Could I pass a test on him? Kind of depends on what questions they ask and so on, right? But am I really getting the essence of the role Abe Lincoln played in history? I would say probably not, given the little I know about him. But now consider, what do I know about Clement of Alexandria? And the answer is basically nothing, right? I basically know nothing about Clement of Alexandria. And how about Justus, the Bishop of Jerusalem, the third Bishop of Jerusalem? Again, basically nothing. Okay, how about James, the brother of Jesus Christ? And the answer is basically nothing at all. And the same for many similar names until reading Eusebius, which I've been reading all week. And I'm almost done with it, but I think I'm going to break this episode into 2 episodes just in case I miss stuff from the end of it. And because it's really good, and this is kind of my theory episode on Eusebius and history and reading and all that stuff. And then I think in the next episode, I will probably read you a few chunks of this towards the end if I have time left over, but the next episode will be more content heavy here, in case anyone wants to hear a summary of Eusebius and the church history. So, what does it indicate that and I'm assuming all of you, I really am assuming all of you, and that's an important fact here, literally anyone who's going to watch this video knows more about Abraham Lincoln than they do about Clement of Alexandria, Justus, the third Bishop of Jerusalem, and James, the brother of Jesus, okay? What does that indicate? Well, to me it indicates that I have decided, or at least I continued consenting to the decision after it was made for me, that America is more important to me than Christianity, right? That's what my knowing indicates there. Okay, sorry, where was I? So yeah, what does it indicate that we know more about Abe Lincoln or Robespierre or who's that mystic freak weirdo from Russia in the 1918 or so, the guy with the beard and stuff. We know more about them than we do about these early church people, James, the brother of Jesus, and so on. What does it indicate? It indicates that you care more about other things than Christianity, right? And so, again, add to this list the stuff like the Russian Revolution, the French Revolution, about Puritanism, I know more about the New York Yankees in the 1920s than I do about what happened to the early martyrs of the Christian religion. And again, what does that suggest? Well, it suggests that I have a very frivolous sort of investment in Christianity, to be honest, right? The larger point here is that all so-called history is perspective-driven. And I think a lot of you think you know this. I think I know it. But somehow our behavior indicates that it hasn't really sunk in yet. I mean, I'm really self-accusing here. I am thinking about this stuff, but I assume many of you will be implicated too, because although I'm claiming to be aware of this phenomenon, and I assume you feel like you've heard this before, we're all still kind of anchored in these mainstream historical facts that we're all supposed to know. Something about Napoleon, and something about Archduke Ferdinand getting assassinated, and something about Germany and World War II, and something about Vietnam and domino theory, and maybe, something about the Renaissance and whatever. But why these things? There's an innumerable, almost infinite number of things that have happened in history almost every day. I mean, actually, you can think of it in terms of the news, right? The daily news. Remember, you used to flip this on at 6:30 at night and watch a half an hour of what happened today. Okay, well, infinite things happened today. There were, children born and old people died, and people, learned how to do things, that discovered stuff, went places, fought, did, all these things happen. And the 30 minutes at night are it's just this edited, curated, selected for you, plate of hors d'oeuvres that says this is what you need to know today, okay? And history is just that on a somewhat bigger scale, somewhat slower scale, okay? And so obviously the question is or the implicit argument from the school teachers, though, I mean, again, they are never forced to make it very explicit, it seems to me, is that these things, again, Vietnam, Germany, the domino theory, Ferdinand, all that stuff, these are the most important, the most notable, the most significant events. And so that's why students need to know them. And additionally, I mean, I suppose they also seem to hint that there are lessons in these events that are near universal in their applicability, okay? So that's maybe the argument. It reminds me, one time I got in this interesting conversation with a girl about the Holocaust, actually. And, this was when I was 24, 25. And I remember her saying, she was saying, we got to learn from this because we don't want it to ever happen again. And I was like, yeah, I mean, definitely. We should learn this. And that way there will never be genocides again. And she was like, well, but it's about making sure that there aren't genocides of the Jews again. And I was like, what? I thought, aren't we trying to extract the universally applicable principle here? I mean, it's the same as if I don't know, Pol Pot took over and abolished money or something. And so we would say, that's not just about Cambodians. It's about you shouldn't abolish money or it'll lead to a pretty bad genocide. Something like that, right? So there's a tug of war about this, but that's my sense of why we study history, especially when we're studying history that isn't our people's history, but it's just kind of history in general, right? Well, why are we doing that? Well, because presumably we're going to learn something, okay? So, okay, I'm going awfully fast, and I'm on a long digression here. Listen, here are 5 historical events. 1, the siege of Gertrudenburg. 2, the Seneca Falls Convention. 3, the Battle of San Quentin Canal. 4, the Russo-Japanese War. 5, the Irish Free State Offensive. Now, okay, here are some events. Are these events that should be taught? That's one way of asking the question. Well, I mean, how do we decide? Like, if I asked you to rank those in terms of significance, if only one of them, we have room for only one of them in our, world history school book, like which one goes in? Well, we have to decide as historians, how to rank these. I mean, this is the essence of like what we do. The same goes for literature. I mean, we've talked about the canon wars before and so on. Ultimately, it's the curriculum that's being negotiated here. So, like, on what basis do we decide which of these events to include? Is it just, the most deaths or something? Or would you try to say, no, it's like the most consequential? But, like, consequential to whom? In what manner? What does that mean, right? The point is, I mean, well, for example, I bet the Irish Free State Offensive seems a lot more important to Irish people than it does to people in Japan. Whereas the Russo-Japanese War probably matters more to the Japanese than it does to the Irish. And the point here is a point that, like, our friend Otto Pohl is probably better equipped to make. But basically, all history emerges from perspective. You can't tell history from nowhere, okay? Every historical incident you have been told is significant. It's significant to someone. It's significant from some particular perspective, okay? I'm not merely saying that we, whoever that is, I mean we, need a narrative or a redemption narrative or whatever. I'm not saying that. I'm saying we, if that's even a thing, we need to become the narrators and editors of history, okay? And so, like, right now, as it's taught in public schools, history, with like a capital H, seems to include a lot about, slavery and the Holocaust, as well as some bits about the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Soviet Union. You might learn one thing about labor movements of the 19th century, or hear a paragraph about the Dreyfus Affair, or learn about the Federal Bank Reserve stuff, or, like the income tax in 1913, these kinds of things. You might even hear a paragraph about Martin Luther and Protestantism, or the printing press, or Henry VIII. Although, like, this stuff will probably just confuse you. I mean, if you're like me, it's like William and Mary, the Stuarts of Orange. What is all this? Who cares? And yeah, I don't know. Like something about Louis the 12th or 13th, about Versailles, and again, who cares? None of it really sticks because it isn't really serving any narrative at all. It's sort of a corrupted attempt at a like neutral history where the events that are being narrated are just like the most important events, right? As if history isn't like a fairy story, but it is. That's what I'm saying. It is. It absolutely must be. There is no neutral history, okay? And all of this, the story that you got in your high school history book, for example, it's all become just further corrupted in recent years as people became aware of like Eurocentrism as a problem, supposedly. And so they began to sprinkle in various tidbits about India's caste system or China's warring states period or whatever else. But it's all basically random at this point, and like it almost confuses more than it helps. You'd be just as well knowing none of it, okay? Because meanwhile, as all this drivel fills your head, it leaves very little room for the, I think, very coherent history that you might start to piece together if you simply read. Ready? I'll tell you 7 books to read in your life. If you just read Thucydides, Tacitus, Josephus, the New Testament, Justin Martyr, Eusebius, and Venerable Bede. If that was literally all you read, if you just read those 7 books, you would be so far ahead of 99% of the people you'll meet, because you will now possess the outlines of a self-consciously Christian history. Now, I should pause there and say, chronologically, that's because the last 2, Eusebius, from about 3, I think he published this in 313 AD, and Bede, who wrote his in like, I want to say 720 or something, give you a purposely Christian history, okay? And yes, they refer back to the likes of Josephus and Tacitus and Thucydides because that's where the story of Christendom, as they understand it, began. Okay, but so they sort of baptize some of the ancient sources, but and by the way, I mean it is really interesting to think about how little from the ancient sources survived. I mean, let me come back to this point at the end. I'll try to remember that at the end. We will return to the idea of the ancient sources and what survived. Okay. And like I said, I know some of my listeners aren't Christians, okay? And so they might sit here and go like Bob Paxson might go, I don't want a Christian history. I don't want these myths polluting. I don't want a superstitious history. Well, let me tell you, Bob, I know some of my listeners like you aren't into the Christian thing, but it doesn't matter because you fools are just lingering in a non-perspectival purgatory where you have to trust whatever cosmopolitan editors of history textbooks decide to print. There is no non-superstitious view of history just because you reject Bede and Eusebius because they talk about miracles or something. No. You have a totally superstitious, and worse than that, basically incoherent set of random factoids that amount to nothing at all. It gives you no basis for action, no basis for values. It doesn't tell you who you are, or where you're going to, or what you're aiming at. None of that stuff is included in a contemporary secular history book. Because you can't really have ultimate values without some metaphysical underpinning, okay? Now, okay, calm down. I'm saying all this because sometimes people will accuse Eusebius of having rose-colored glasses when they read something like this. I'm going to actually quote him here. I was watching a video lecture about Eusebius, and the guy started with this quote from his Life of Constantine, and I thought it was an interesting paragraph. So this is Eusebius. He says, now, and again, yeah, okay, I'll read it first and then comment on it. But he says, quote, now that the evil men were removed, the sunlight shone, purified at last of dictatorial tyranny. The whole Roman dominion was joined together, the peoples of the East being united with the other half, and the whole body was orderly disposed by the single universal government acting as its head, the authority of a single ruler reaching every part. Bright beams of the light of true religion brought shining days to those who before had sat in darkness and the shadow of death. There was no more memory of former evils, as all people everywhere sang praise to the victor and professed to know only his Savior God. And he, famous for every godly virtue, the Emperor Victor, he created this title personally for himself as his most appropriate surname because of the victory which God had given him over all his enemies and foes, took over the East. This is Constantine, of course. He brought under his control one Roman Empire united as of old, the first to proclaim to all the monarchy of God, and by monarchy himself directing the whole of life under Roman rule. All fear was removed of those evils by which all had been formerly oppressed. The people in every province and city celebrated merry feasts, and those who before were sad looked on each other with smiling faces and bright eyes. Their choruses and hymns spoke first of all of God the universal King, as he truly is, and then with unrestrained voices celebrated the conqueror and his most virtuous and God-beloved sons, the Caesars. There was a forgetting of ancient ills, oblivion of every wickedness, enjoyment of present good, and expectation of more to come. End quote. Now, look, the thing about this is, it's sort of maddening to me. I've given you my thing. If you watched the recent video I re-uploaded of Josephus, I tried to spell out again exactly what I think is happening in Christian history, which is that the coming of Logos basically sort of literally saved, in a literal political way, saved humankind from itself. It was destroying itself, it was eating itself up. Baddies had taken over, and this was the replacement of bad order with good order. It couldn't be more important, okay? And it happened in a way that it appears supernatural. It happened right when it needed to happen. It happened to the people to whom it needed to happen. It's hard to explain this stuff, okay? So recently I did that. I posted that video and I got an interesting comment from, I think a pretty long time and reasonable listener. But he says it's a half Galatian I'm responding to here if you want to go and read his comments there. But he says, with respect, I don't think your refutation of Tobias Singer's point about the Messianic age is that good. Now, what's he referring to? Well, Tobias Singer often says, the tools will be beaten into, the plowshares will be, the swords will be beaten into plowshares, and there will be universal peace or something after the Messiah comes. And Tobias Singer goes, well, has all war stopped? And you have to say, well, no. And then it's so therefore Jesus wasn't the Messiah. And it's well, hold on there. Because, actually there was, again, if you go back and watch the Josephus episode, piles of body, just literally blood in the streets up to the horse's bridle. That's one of, what's his name, Josephus's phrases. And Thucydides speaks of similar things in, 400 years, around the time of Socrates' birth or something. So we're talking violence on a scale that none of us have endured, okay? And what Eusebius is saying here, and what really Josephus was starting to see in his work, and what Paul is anticipating in his letters, and what Constantine thinks. The reason that Constantine thinks he's going to claim victory by this sign, famously, is because he sees this is bringing people who used to be enemies together, or at least allowing interpersonal trust to happen, okay? So it's the most significant thing that's ever happened in human history, maybe since we became, not hunter-gatherers, but civilized as a species, right? Something like that. It's right up there, is the point. And so, again, half Galatians says, so he says, where I say, but things were calmer after the destruction of Jerusalem, isn't really the fulfillment of the Isaiah prophecy. And I get what he's saying, I understand the point, but I really think, when you read, look, what he's going to say is, because I said, where's the thing on Josephus there? He says, hold on. He says, sorry, I'm pulling this stuff up here. Why does Josephus say, or wait, nope. The point there is he'll say Josephus is basically, he's got Stockholm syndrome. He's I had another comment from a guy who said it's obvious that Josephus wrote to flatter the Flavian dynasty. Okay, so they're trying to dismiss Josephus's writings as basically pro-Roman, anti-Jewish propaganda, and by that to say basically we can't trust him. There's a couple of problems with this. First of all, we don't have any better sources for this time period. Okay, the next thing is that Josephus was huge. Josephus is an almost unbelievably interesting case. This guy was better known than any other historian in the world. The pagans liked him, the Jews liked him, the Greeks, the Egyptians. He was known throughout the literate world as a reliable historian. So to say, we can't trust Josephus, it's well, then we don't know anything about history. You can do that if you want. Now, of course, yes, the rabbinic tradition basically threw Josephus out because they didn't like what was happening. Obviously, right? Jerusalem got destroyed. They find themselves basically having to start a religion from scratch, not as practiced from ancient history, but a religion that's newer even than Christianity in order to keep their act together. So, of course, they're not pleased about that, and I get it. I get it. But if you're a Christian, you have, the fact is, the early Christians on purpose this is what I was going to say about what gets preserved from the canon, right? You guys, 99.9% of all the ancient scrolls in the Library of Alexandria are poof, dust, nothing, gone forever, right? The stuff that got saved on purpose because people doing the saving the Christians, namely, believed it was important enough to save. So they must have believed it was instructive in some sense. So yes, you have like Aeschylus and Sophocles and Euripides, for example. And you have your Plato and some Aristotle. And you have fragments from, Proclus or from maybe they saved all of Plotinus or something. I mean, again, by the 3rd century, a new culture is underway. But basically, you've got very little. You've got Homer. You've got you could read the whole. That's what I'm trying to say is you could read all of it. Okay, so imagine we're in a situation like that now. I think we actually are, right? You're in this situation where you're living in this Babylonish Roman Empire culture right now. It's it's the most powerful the world has ever seen, but at the same time, it's kind of falling apart. It appears like the financial stable system is unstable. You've got the kind of corrupted rulers. Science looks like it's becoming corrupted. Everything's kind of a mess with America right now. It certainly could collapse. And if it goes into a big collapse, the sort of thing where there isn't a backup empire to take over, then you better be scrambling to try to preserve whatever books from this period you think are worth preserving. And it's I think I'll post right here, if I can remember to in the video, a picture of my favorite bookshelf in my house. And this is where I'm keeping the books that I think are most important, because look, I mean, it's every 6 months Steven Pinker publishes some new book, and it's is this book really going to last 2,000 years? Do you not think that there was a Steven Pinker of Alexandria, Egypt, or a Malcolm Gladwell of Athens? There was, of course there was. But they don't get preserved because they don't help us to understand the big cycle. The big cycle. That's all that matters, because once the big change comes, right? Once we're in the true, once decline is undeniable, the empire goes into retreat, and we're in the new dark ages or whatever, and whatever, you take sides. You're either a barbarian again, or you're a secret Christian or whatever. Once we're in that situation, the only thing you care about is the big movement, right? You're going to preserve the story at that point. You'll understand why the story of Noah and the flood was so important. You'll understand why we should have listened about Jonah as so important. These stories, you'll get it, because then you'll see that this is terrible and we need to prevent it from ever happening again, even though it's probably not going to happen again for 2,000 or 3,000 years, because now we're reduced to ashes and we have to start over again, and it's going to take us 1,000 years to build civilization again to a point where it even could collapse again, right? So so the point is you got your Josephus, and then you get these guys like Justin Martyr. You get Athanasius, you get Tertullian, you get Eusebius. Eusebius in this book basically says he's going to tell the history of the Christian church. He gives you a brief, over picture of the story of Jesus. And then he talks about some of the most interesting, he'll just talk about, he does basically his own version of the book of Acts, kind of much of it kind of confirmed by, either, by oral tradition as much as by anything written. Or, for example, here he includes a copy of a letter written by Abgarus, the ruler of Edessa, to Jesus Christ. And how about this? The letter Jesus wrote back to Abgarus, which is amazing, right? I'll let you sort of look that one up if you like. But you've got that kind of stuff, and then you've got what happened to all his disciples. What's interesting about this is somehow I knew in the back of my mind, at somewhere in my life, I had heard things like Paul got martyred in Rome, Peter did too, he got crucified upside down, John was imprisoned on the Isle of Patmos, and then went and died, I think, in Ephesus or something. He was the only one of the 12 who didn't get martyred. And this is what this book is reporting, all that stuff. And it's when you start to read it and you read it carefully, it's these are my people. These are my people, And I think once you get your hooks into it, you want to know what happened to them. This is the people, so to speak, And at that point, nothing else does matter. And so you can start to see how a people emerges from a cosmopolitan empire, right? Like, you guys, of all the people who lived in first century Rome, really, like, they all just got mashed up into a cosmopolitan, like, race, right? Like, they just became kind of Italians, you know what I mean? Like, which is meaningless, except for the Christians. The Christians formed a people unit, and this people unit was like a significant thing that allowed them to like break with Rome and become something new. And you can all tell that's what we need to be doing, right? So once you start to feel a connection to these early, like the apostles. He talks about the 12 disciples, the 70 apostles or whatever it is. He talks about there's a lot in here. I mean, I got to say about like stuff like this. I'm like reluctant to even read it out loud, but I mean, basically like Caligula and there was a lot of persecutions of the people from Jerusalem in the couple of decades after that. By the way, Eusebius quotes from Josephus and from Philo all the time. Philo was Jewish, huge famous scholar in Alexandria. So there's a lot going on here, and like part of it is you can say, I don't understand. I mean, you're welcome to my comment section to say like, something like, oh, this was written to flatter the Flavian dynasty, or oh, this is propaganda, pro-Christian, anti-Jewish propaganda. Listen, you guys, all, as Otto said in a recent tweet, all history is propaganda. That's what history is. We're selecting from an innumerable sequence of events. And I shouldn't even say a sequence of events. Like, in what way are events causal? You know what I mean? It's like maybe in the like Chinese emperor and the butterfly flapping its wings kind of way, but like basically it's not even causal. It gets to a point where it's not even really causal because everything is so complicated. But you're going to read about Pilate's suicide, about the incredible martyrdom of Jesus's half-brother, James, right? I mean, did you even know this? Did you know that James was like a seriously based disciple who was finally pushed by the apostles by the Jews to, repent of his allegiance to Jesus. They demanded that he denounce Jesus as the God, or else they were going to kill him. And they made him go up on top of the Jewish temple, which is, 400 feet high. And he was supposed to proclaim that Jesus isn't God. And instead he said, Jesus is God. And so they went up there and pushed him off of it. Like, that's a great story, and you should know it. And this is where we like would have heroes, but you don't read this, do you? Because you read a generic, like kind of no people's history, right? And that's what you get instead of this really interesting stuff where, wouldn't you like to know what happened to Mark after he wrote the Gospel of Mark, or about the calamity which befell the Jews in Jerusalem on the day of the Passover, or the events which took place in Jerusalem during the reign of Nero? Paul makes his defense in Rome. Then it goes all the way up through the Bar Kokhba rebellion in 132 and Hadrian's banning the Jews from Jerusalem. Eusebius, quoting Josephus, says that the whole number of the slain there in the year 70 AD was 1.1 million. So, I mean, I don't know, like, again, you can call this propaganda, but there is no alternative history. It doesn't exist. So, like, you either throw in with the Christians here, or you don't know anything about the 2nd century, 1st century. And this is like as Rome is sort of turning the corner. This goes all the way up through 313, which is basically Constantine and the baptism of the Roman Empire. It's such a really interesting book. I think what I am going to do is do a second episode on Eusebius where I don't have to do this kind of meta-historical like meditation about the whole thing, and I'll just give you the content. But I wanted to rattle this one off because it got me to thinking like, what? I mean, it seems to me that the primary like energy if they're like if you think you're woke, or if you know, because there's a lot of people, and I don't blame them, who feel kind of betrayed by America. You know, like when I was a kid, I felt like an American. But at this point, like, what's an American? I mean, that's just anybody who can get in here, and it's kind of like it's becoming not that difficult to get in here. And there's 400 million people or whatever, and I don't know them all, and you know, that's not a community, right? So if you're looking for an identity, a sense of direction, values, traditions, those kinds of things, and things like eating hot dogs on the 4th of July doesn't quite, you know, move you, then, you know, again, consider this Christian history. And by the way, like, it is, I mean, it does make you, it makes me feel pro-Western, basically Roman Catholic, right? I mean, but the thing is, the interesting thing is, it's not like, you know, I mean, there, you know, I'm sure, like, if we look closely, there's probably points where Martin Luther would, like, you have to, because the thing is, I mean, again, this is really interesting because you have to figure out, like, okay, say you're a skeptic of all this, and you don't want to believe Eusebius, and you don't want to believe Venerable Bede because he talks about healings and stuff. Okay, but, like, where do you pick up history? This is, like, very well attested stuff, by the way. You know, in the first century, like, you've got the writings of Paul himself. You've got Luke, who met with Paul, writing Luke and the book of Acts, talking about what happened to Paul. And then you've got these guys who knew Paul. I can't remember their names, but they're in this book, who themselves went and, you know, interviewed the disciples. They wanted to know if Paul's testimony squared up with theirs, and, like, it's all very, it's like, if you don't believe that, then again, there's nothing to believe. Like, you don't know anything. It's just, it might as well be a complete black hole. And very few people will do that. I mean, to throw it all out, you know? So I think it's like, it's really, it's worth your time to read stuff like this, because when you start to get into it, you start to see, like, it's not easy to figure out, like, where we could draw the line and be like, okay, now we're past the age of miracles and we're going to be, like, secular and reasonable and stuff. It's like, no, like, these were reasonable people. These were, like, somebody like Justin Martyr was a Greek philosopher who tried arguing the Greek philosophy side of things with Christians until he was convinced these Christians are right. Like, and he like heard enough proof that he was like, there seemed to be miracles. I mean, what are you going to do about it, you know? And so then they just, like, wrote it down. This is what we think is real. And I think, like, you can be skeptical of that, but if you are, we don't have other history. There's not, like, a skeptic's history of the 1st or 2nd century. You know what I mean? And I think it feels very, like, kind of convenient to just take your Thomas Jefferson X-Acto knife to all these books and cut out all the parts that are inconvenient for your worldview, you know? So, and I don't know, like, I really like it. I really want you to read with me Eusebius and Bede. Both of those felt like a revelation to me. And I said the other stuff, like Josephus and Thucydides, Tacitus, because you need to get, like, you need to get a sense that people were of similar mind to you secular American, in the centuries before Eusebius and Bede. So people had the secular mind. They had the disenchanted mind. They had the mind that thought miracles were foolish. Then came, you know, sort of Josephus, to be honest. He starts to turn that corner, because he says things like God seemed to be on the Roman side. And then, you know, certainly Eusebius, and certainly Bede, and, like, you know, and, like, what's his name, Boethius, and a few others in that mix in there, in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th centuries. You know, you got your Barnabas, the Epistle of Barnabas is extant. You can read that online. Clement of Alexandria wrote a letter. Eusebius does a lot to talk about, like, which books of the Bible are authoritative and which aren't. It's interesting. He says Jude and James are kind of iffy. He also says the 2nd letter of Peter is iffy, and the 2nd and 3rd letters of John are a little iffy. But the first, you know, 1 John is solid for sure. So, I mean, I don't know. He also says, like, the gospel, he also says that the first 3 gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, were written by people who weren't really, like, literati, you know what I mean? And so that's why John felt he had to write his. So you get the first 3 kind of just brutally, like, telling you what happened. But then John John's gospel kind of goes literary and, can do things with like symbolism and irony and allusion and so on. All right, well, I'm basically out of time here. Thanks for listening to this episode. I think we'll stay in the ancient world in the next episode, and I've got, what was it I was going to do next? Well, if I finish reading Eusebius, I might come back to him, but I think I had one other one I was going to throw in there in the meantime. I'll let it be a surprise. Thanks for listening to the Godward Podcast. As usual, the Patreon link is in the description. And the last thing we did, I thought was one of our best conversations. I'm not trying to pressure you. It's just that those live conversations we have every other Friday night with patrons only are like, I really look forward to it. It's so fun, and I think it's some of the best conversation on the internet right now. So think about it. $5 a month? Like, what are you doing with $5 a month? Bye-bye.